So if you have your Bibles, Matthew chapter 4, we're going to start in verse 18, and we are going to be talking about the beloved disciple. We're going to be talking about the disciple John today. Last week we looked at his brother James, and now we're going to look at the younger brother of James, John, and how he interacted with Jesus. And last week we were taking a look at John. He's the hothead. He's the guy that always has to feel like he's got to be right. If he's not going to be right, he's going to get in a fight over it. Did we have anybody that resonated with the hothead last week? Okay. Everybody's getting mad, so they're going to get right. Okay. Anybody? A couple hotheads out there? Okay. You know that when things don't go your way, or if things are like a little disjointed, it's always fight first, ask questions later. And that was James last week. This week we're going to take a look at his brother, and he is of the similar cloth of James, but he's of a little bit different than being a hothead. He is actually going to be one that is very particular about things being correct. And so if you are a kind of person like that, if everything has to have its own little slot, and everything's either right or wrong, or black or white, or left or right, you're going to find a person that you can connect with in the disciple John. So we'll start at Matthew 4, verse 18. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, we looked at him the first week, and Andrew, his brother, we looked at him the second week, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and they followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them. And immediately they left their boat and their father, and they followed him. So I want you to understand what's happened right now. Jesus is just starting his ministry. He's starting to collect guys to be his disciples. He's already gathered two sets of brothers. The first one's Peter, which we looked at, and the second one was Andrew. Well, actually, Andrew kind of came a little bit before Peter, but they're about simultaneous. So you got Peter and Andrew, who are brothers, and then you got the second set, who is James and John. So now he's got four disciples, both of them two sets of brothers. And what you're going to see in John today is that in the same way James was a real, like, I'm going to burn the barn down before I save any of the cows, John is very similar to that. He's the littler brother of James. So if you got a hothead for an older brother, any of you guys that have hothead older siblings, and you're the younger brother or younger sister, you kind of know to survive, you got to develop some survival skills in your home. If you got picked on a lot by older siblings. And so that's kind of the way I envision John. Kind of the smaller, scrappier brother between the two of them. They're both hotheads, but John is kind of the scrappier one of the two. So if they were going to be MMA fighters, they'd probably be in different weight classes, but John would be just as tough as his brother, but he's a little bit different than his brother. And we're going to see that this morning, that John likes to have things exactly set right down the line. So I resonate actually with John a little bit more than I resonate with a lot of the other disciples, because I kind of have there's a part of my brain that's very scientific, that's very, I like things to fit in a certain order, a certain phyla. Everything goes ching, 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 ching. Everything has its spot, its space. And mathematical, I think, in very black and white type of scenarios. But there's another weird side of me that's very artsy. And so I have this like continual weird thing going on in my brain where it's not, my brain fights against itself, because at other aspects of me are just very like, hey, why can't we all just get along? And these kind of gray areas, like it's art and it's expansive and it goes between extremes. So inside of my own brain, I have art and I have kind of weird mathematical. So when I see John, I see him very similar to that, where he's going to see things in very black and white, stark colors. If you read the Gospel of John, if you read 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and if you read the book of Revelation, he wrote all those books. If you read those, you're going to see he doesn't write he writes in no gray areas. He writes darkness, light, devil, angel, earth, heaven, God, you. He writes in these, like, you're just like, well, John, settle down. You know, I mean, it's like, hey, Everything doesn't have to be so extreme. John writes like, it's this or it's that. It's this or it's that. Black, white, red, brown. I mean, there's just like, it's one or the other. And so I resonate with that. If you're like that in your personality, if you're very rigid and like, it's got to be this way or it's got to be that way, it can't be right here. It's this or it's that. If you find yourself being very rigid and like kind of you struggle with being graceful and merciful to other people, then you're going to find a friend in John. And we're going to see the fantastic way that Jesus molds John from being that kind of guy, one of the sons of thunder, to actually being the apostle of love. Number one, the background. John, the man of black and white. John, the man of black and white. John is the delineator. He cuts right down the middle of something and he says it's either this side or it's that side. John grew up near Capernaum on the shore of Galilee. He helped his brother James run the father Zebedee's fishing business in partnership with Peter and Andrew. So they're actually, the two sets of brothers are actually in partnership together. They have a fishing business together. Zebedee, their father, was a man of affluence, able to employ his sons and multiple helpers along with his wife Salome. She was able to help support Jesus' ministry. We looked at this a little bit last week. Ministry only happens when the people of God give to the ministry of God. It's the only way it happens. There's no miraculous thing that happens in the church bank account. The only miracle is you and me as we give to the things of God. So that's what their mother did for her two sons, for James and John. She financed their ministry so that her two sons could get trained by Jesus. John spent some time with John the Baptist in the wilderness. And because the Baptist ate locusts and wild honey, John was not a spoiled rich kid, but a tough man with a heart for God. And we looked at this a little bit last week. John the Baptist, he's hardcore. You want to get trained by John the Baptist? You better get ready. It's kind of like one of those dare me things. I dare you to eat that. John's snapping off heads off of big, heavy locusts and eating, locusts are like cracked out crickets. And so they would get these, locusts and eat them. He's eating wild honey out of a hive. I mean, just wearing, camel skin clothes. I mean, if he walked in, you just go, whoa, what's going on at the orchard? I mean, you just be like, wow, he's a gnarly guy. To hang out with him, for John to say, I want to go get trained by that guy, you got to yourself be a pretty hardy, I'm willing to go take care of business kind of guy. So John goes to be, and I want you to understand, so don't get confused, ready? The book of John in your Bible was not written by John the Baptist. People get those two confused. They have the same name, two different guys. So John the Baptist is not the same guy as John the disciple. John the Baptist never followed Jesus, okay? He just plowed the way for Jesus' ministry. But John the disciple was a disciple of John the Baptist who left John the Baptist to go follow Jesus. That's where we find ourselves today in the story, okay? So just don't get confused on that because there's going to be a lot of Johns. It's like when I meet somebody, my name is Jim. Hi, I'm Jim. Well, I'm Jim, and I'm Jim, and I'm Jim. Okay, John was a very popular name of the first century, okay? So you're going to find a lot of Johns in there, but they're two different guys. When John left the Baptist to go follow Jesus, Jesus eventually called him and his brother the sons of thunder because of their wild, sometimes reckless character, exemplified by wanting to destroy a whole village for disrespecting them. And we saw this last week in Luke chapter 9, where they're trying to travel through Samaria, and they come to this village, and Jesus has sent them on ahead to get the village prepped for him and all his disciples. And James and John go in and go, hey, Jesus is coming. We need some room here. Can you provide us some food? And they go, you're a Jew. We hate Jews. Get out of here. We don't want you here. And James and John go back to Jesus and go, hey, whoa, time out, village. You don't know who we're with. We're with Jesus. So they go with Jesus and they go, hey, should we call down some fire from heaven and torch this place? I mean, imagine hanging out with Jesus doing that. So Jesus is just on his way to Jerusalem, and John and his brother go, Jesus, you know what? I think we need to light this place up. Let's show them who's boss. You don't kick us out of your village. We'll burn this place to the ground, and we'll see what kind of village you got left, which will be nothing. You want to get tough with us? Okay. We're going to see who the daddy is in this picture. I'm going to call down some fire right now. We're going to torch this place, and all the other villagers are going to go, come on in, Jesus. We want you here. I mean, James and John are that kind of guys. Luke chapter 9, they say, hey, should we call down some fire from heaven, Jesus? And imagine now, John, who's part of the DNA of James, hothead, he now is going to start to follow Jesus and is going to be molded by Christ. And let's see what kind of man he becomes. Despite his misplaced ambition and passion wanting to be the best and greatest, Jesus made John one of the greatest apostles in history. I want you to turn to Mark. So we're in Matthew, next book towards the back of your Bible, Matthew, Mark. Mark chapter 10, verse 35. This is so awesome. This is so awesome. Has your wife ever done this to you? Has your wife ever said this? Or ladies, have you ever said this to your husband? You really need a raise. You need to go ask I want you to walk into your boss's office and you tell him that you've been here for 20 years and that the guy over you is a total dud and that he has the intelligence of a small rat and that you are the man that should be running this division. Or maybe you in your own head go, you know what? I should be running this place. Guy running this place has like a intelligence of a watermelon. Man, I could run this place in my sleep better than this guy does. I should be the boss. I should be the man. Why shouldn't I be the man? Or the woman, or whatever. Why shouldn't I be her or him? You want to know what? We think the disciples are some kind of like stained glass guys with like, they walked around with halos, like, oh, and the angels just like brush them with their wings or whatever and they're walking. These are real men. These are real men. And you want to know one of the most vivid pictures of them being real men? Despite the fact they wanted to torch a village from heaven. But is this picture right here. So watch. Jesus, at this point in Mark 10, has gathered all his disciples. He's got the 12. Okay, so this is a couple years down the road. But I want to show you this picture of who John was in his mind. Because he's the kind of guy, like most go-getter type guys, that's like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I'm going to be the best. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to be the best at this. It's like the guys in the NFL right now. The reason they're in the Super Bowl right now isn't because they sat around and ate chocolate bars all day long every day and go, you know, I think I'm going to be a NFL player someday. Man, they work day and night and day and night and day and night to get to the pinnacle of their sport. That's how men are built. Men are just built that way by nature. They're just built to say, hey, you know, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to be the best at it. So James and John, same thing. Watch this in Mark chapter 10. Because we think, oh, the disciples, they never dealt with like pride or ambition or anything like that. Hey, welcome to the real world. Right here in Mark chapter 10, verse 35. Oh, I love James and John. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Your kids ever said that to you? You know if your kids have asked you that, whatever's coming next is going to be bad news, right? It's like when your kid sits on your lap and goes, you know, Daddy, do you love me? Yeah, all the girls out there are going, yeah, I've done that before. To, just like, Daddy, if you really loved me, you'd give me this, that, or the other thing. Or, you walk up to somebody and you go, do you really love me? You know if that question's the first question that comes out of their mouth, something bad's about ready, the next thing is going to be bad news, right? So imagine this. James and John walk up to Jesus and they go, hey, Jesus, I want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. I mean, imagine saying that to Jesus. Walk up to Jesus, hey, you know what, Jesus, I've been thinking about something. I'm not going to tell you what it is right now. I'm just going to say to you before I tell you, I just want you to do it. Imagine saying that and Jesus, who isn't an idiot, doesn't go, oh yeah, no, whatever you guys want. It sounds good. I love it. So they go, Jesus, we just want you to, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I just want you to do whatever I'm going to ask of you right now. Verse 36, I love Jesus. He doesn't say, yeah, sure, that sounds great. He says, what do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Jesus said to them, now, right here he goes, you do not know what you are asking. I love that. He goes, you know what? That's really stupid. And then he goes on to say this. So right now, Jesus is giving like a mild rebuke. It's not like getting up in your face, but it's like saying, That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm going to tell you why it's stupid right now. So he says this, you don't even know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I will be baptized? So stop right there, time out. Right there, if you're James and John, you just go, shut your mouth. You just go like this. Jesus did not say yes. He didn't say, ask for whatever you want. He gives me actually something weird about baptism and some. So James and John, if you're James and John, you just kind of back off. You go, whoa, okay, cool. You're not going to do whatever I'm going to ask you about. Okay, cool. You know what I love about them? Look at the next verse. Oh, we are able. I love that. You know what? It's so perfect, men, especially the men, the style of James and John, which is just like rough and tough, and I'll fight before I think, and all those kinds of things. Jesus, we just want you to do whatever we want you to do. Jesus goes, well, what do you want me to do? He goes, we want to sit at your right hand 2,000 years ago in a Jewish context. If you were the king, we looked at this a little bit last week, to sit on the right hand of a king, you were like second in command. To sit on the left, you were like third in command. So imagine this. The two brothers want to run the kingdom with Jesus. They're basically saying, we want to be at the top. All the other 10 disciples, lame-os. Put us in. You've seen us in action, Jesus. We almost called down fire. How can you ask for more than this, Jesus? You can run the kingdom. I'll have my little piece of the pie. James can have his little piece of the pie. And Jesus goes, you don't even know what you're asking. You have no idea what you're asking. Are you able to be baptized with the baptism that I'm about ready to undergo, talking about his death coming up? Are you able to drink the cup of God's wrath and punishment that I'm going to drink? And they don't go, that sounds intense. No, I don't think we can do that. They're going, oh yeah, we can do that. We're able. And Jesus must have just gone, what in the world do I have here? You sure you can? Because right now they're thinking, oh, he's talking about like, here comes the kingdom. The baptism of his kingdom's coming. He's going to drink the cup of royalty. He's saying, I'm going to die. You're going to drink that cup? And they're just like, oh yeah. They didn't even know what Jesus was talking about. They're just like, yeah, whatever that is, sounds good. James, we looked at him last week, becomes the first disciple to get martyred, got his head cut off by Herod Agrippa I. Now his brother John is going to outlive all the other disciples, but he is going to suffer as well. Through the refining work of God, ambition can provide clarity of belief, and passion can produce the power for ministry. I had somewhat of a difficult time coming to the Lord because of the one side of my brain that's very analytical and scientific and mathematical, from the standpoint like I didn't know how everything went. Science provided a lot of answers for me in opposition to there needing to be a God. So it wasn't until somebody actually kind of walked me through the reality of living that you can't even get real functional design. Life needs a starter. I mean, even the law of biogenesis, life comes forth from life, and so you have to have a first life to even have life on the earth. So it was a struggle for me, being a very logical guy, to walk through faith in God. And I had a lot of people that had those same struggles as I did walk me through some of those things. The things like love and forgiveness and justice. Things that aren't physical. They're not a chair, but we know they exist. In fact, our societies can't even function without these things. But they're not real. They're not tangible. And I realized at that moment that the things that are most important to humans aren't the physical things. They're the actual things that make us have value. And that value has to come from something greater than ourselves. Because I didn't produce it. My parents didn't go, these are the things that need to be important to you, is love, forgiveness, justice, things that are intangible. It was already built inside of me. I was already designed that way. And me and the guy in Zimbabwe, and the Roman from 2,000 years ago, we're all the same. Society doesn't teach us those things. They may have different rules, but we have an ultimate standard inside of our heads that we're built with. And I said, wow, that is the imprint and the stamp of God. Because it doesn't come from anywhere else except somebody higher than me. Somebody's built me to feel these things, to want these things, to have a value for those things. and I came into submission to Christ. And it was somewhat difficult for me because I had many things in my head that I was like, these don't make sense. But all of a sudden, God broke into my darkness, and all of a sudden it all made sense. And what was fantastic is that when I look at John, I see the same thing. I see a guy who sees black and white. I see a guy that needs evidence. And Jesus provides that for him. And he becomes one of the greatest apostles of all time. John ultimately wrote 5 books of the New Testament, and because of his fiery disposition, he often used contrast to describe the Christian life with no gray area. Light, darkness, truth, lies, love, hate. And we see that in John 1:5 and 1 John 1:5. Number 2, the follow me moment. John forsakes the fish. For many of us, what would be the 2 most difficult things we probably have to give up in our lives? Would probably be our finances. Would be if we really love our job, if we really like what we do, or if it funds a lot of our things that we enjoy. I like to go to the river. I like to have a new boat every year. I like to have jet skis. I like to have a new E-Class Mercedes. I like to have a 5-bedroom house up on a hill or out in the vineyard or whatever. The things that you like, those only come about if somebody pays for them. Either you do or somebody else has to. Somebody's got to pay for it. If you have the kind of job that affords you the nice luxuries of life, it becomes very difficult when you become affluent to let go of those things and follow God. Because you're too worried about losing those things, you kind of go, gosh, if I have to let go of these things, man, my whole life's going to change. One is probably your finances, and number 2 is leaving family. Because many of us are very connected to our family. If we had to actually physically leave our family, that would be very detrimental to many of us. But John and James do both of those things. They leave their father's business, they leave their inheritance, they leave their future money, and they leave their family to go and be trained by Christ. And we see John going, hey, I'm ready to go. It says they immediately left everything to follow Jesus. He forsakes everything he's known before to follow Christ. After Jesus produced a miracle catch of fish, John left his father's business for Jesus, and we see that in Luke 5. Over the years, John transformed from a scrappy, temperamental, and judgmental man to a controlled, merciful, and loving pastor. John was always listed among the first 3 disciples, and was one of the few to have private training with Jesus and see him at the Transfiguration. Among Jesus' earthly relationships, John was his most loved disciple, trusted ally, and best friend. Is it kind of weird for you to think that Jesus had a best friend? That's kind of weird, isn't it? Because we kind of think like Jesus just kind of views humanity like, I am God. You are small, minuscule, smushy people that I can send fire down from heaven and destroy. And so we kind of look at Jesus like this kind of like omnipotent blob in the sky that kind of views everything the same. It's interesting, when he was on earth, he had disciples that were his best friend. John was his most loved disciple. All the way through the Gospel of John, it says that he was the beloved disciple. Every time Jesus did something, the majority of the time, John was right there. Jesus loved John. I can imagine like Jesus just putting his arm around John going, you know what, man, I love you and I appreciate you. Out of all the other 11 guys, I know I can count on you. And I love that about Jesus, is that Jesus looks at John and doesn't go, you're just one of the guys. Jesus had a best friend too. Jesus had a guy he poured his life into and who poured his life into him. Just like a real man, like a real relationship. And this is one thing I want to point out. And I've talked a little bit about this before. If you don't have somebody pouring into your life, if you're not walking alongside of somebody, if you're kind of one of those island people that's like, I'm just going to kind of do life on my own, you're missing out on the best part of living. I can guarantee you this. Ready? I'm going to prophesy. Ready? I can guarantee you this. There's nobody more individualistic and isolationist than myself. I have that weird combo of like, everything has to be in order, but yet I like to be really artsy. And so that causes me to like want to play sad songs in a dark room by myself. I have that like melancholy type of personality. So here's the thing, watch this. So the fact that I'm up here in the blazing lights speaking with the Spirit of God is a miracle. You see a miracle every week when you come here. You're like, oh, you did all these things. I'm going to tell you right now, if I wasn't here, I'd be playing music in a bar somewhere and everybody be crying, okay? That's what I'd be doing. If I wasn't saved, I would not be doing this. Let's just put it that way. It's a miracle that I'm a pastor. It's a miracle, okay? Let's just be clear. And I say that for this reason. You miss out on the joys of life when you don't get discipled. Unless you have somebody walk along with you, unless you have someone in your life that's walking with you, if you're always going to walk by yourself, it's the loneliest place to be. It's just lonely. You need somebody that you can walk behind, see how they live their life, and pattern your life after that. Because that's what John did with Jesus, and other people after Jesus died followed John. And this is the whole point of this Follow Me series. This is our theme for the year. Is the same things that individuals should do is the same things we as a corporate church should do. We're corporately together. We will follow Jesus wherever he wants us to go. Right? We don't own this land. Jesus owns this land. If he wants us to leave, we get up and leave. If he wants us to stay, we stay here. If he wants us to build a building to incorporate more people, we build a building. We do whatever Jesus wants. We don't tell Jesus what we're going to do. We do what he wants to do. And for me personally, the only reason I'm here is because Jesus called me here. Jesus called me to be a pastor. I'm standing here because I left a place that I loved, that I had family connections to, that people that came to know the Lord. Your worship leaders up here, I discipled them since they were in 9th grade. I married the two of them. I baptized them. I'm involved in their lives. I left many people like that to come here. I left many things that I loved, that I thought, these are the blessings of God in my life. I left those to come find the blessing with you guys. Because we are on a journey together. If you're running by yourself, if you're not finding somebody to disciple you, if you're not getting involved in like things outside of this Sunday morning, you have to start getting connected, guys. Especially you men. Don't run by yourself. Don't do it. Get here to the men's study on Tuesday night. Get here on Wednesday nights with your family or whatever. You need to be doing something that connects you with other people. It's going to cost you something, but you will gain way more when you're obedient to the call of God. And the reason I say that is because I'm not talking about some like ethereal land where no one lives. Like, oh, no one, I don't even know what you're talking about. Hey, I've had to do it myself. I've had to get up and leave and come here. I've sacrificed to be here with you. And many of you have sacrificed to come here. And now we're together. And we move together as a community now to follow after God. And that's what we see with John and James and all the rest of the disciples. They're trained by Christ, but even after Jesus leaves, they're training others. John was the only disciple to follow Jesus through his trials, scourging, crucifixion, and death, and was entrusted with taking care of Jesus' mother Mary. I love this in John 19, at the very end of Jesus' life, which we'll celebrate at Easter. This is a scene you may not realize. Is Jesus is naked. He's been stripped of all of his clothes. He's been hung up in public. They've run nails through his wrists and his feet. They've pounded a crown of thorns into his skull. It says they beat him with rods on his face and his head. They tore his beard out of his face. They whipped him so that his whole back is shredded and open, and he has open lesions on his back. So he's hanging there. Imagine at the promenade when you go to lunch today, you pull up to the promenade and you see naked, whipped, bloody, and swollen men just oozing blood all over the ground. That's the kind of public humiliation and execution that Romans would do to people that they felt were against them. So Jesus is hanging there in the most disgusting, vile way possible. Probably his face is swollen. He can hardly even breathe. His tongue is probably tore up. He has blood and saliva running out of his mouth, and he's hanging there, and he's getting towards dying. And he looks down, and who does he see? He doesn't see Peter. He doesn't see any of the other disciples. You know, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, you know who he looks down and sees? He sees John. Jesus looks down and sees John. In one of his last breaths, John and his mother, Mary, are standing there. And he looks down and he says, "Mother, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." And the Bible says from that point on, John took his mother home to be with him. and that he took care of the widows and the orphans. John was that kind of friend to Jesus. John went through every trial with Jesus. He went through the scourging where they would hook him up to a pole and whip him. They took him to the cross, and they hung him on a cross. And it was scary to even hang out with a guy that was executed, because if they were being executed for treason, which is technically what Jesus was crucified for, if you were known to be kind of in connection with them, they would crucify you too. So for John to be standing at the foot of the cross with Mary, I mean, he's not only risking possibly his life, but he is there connecting with Jesus at his most vile, reprehensible moment of his life, where he's dying for the sins of the world. And it says from that moment on, Jesus' best friend took his mother, and she lived with him, tradition says, for the rest of her life. Mary died in John's house. Now that's a best friend. And let me ask you this, guys. Do you have a friend like that? That's what I'm talking about. Many of us live such solo lives, we don't have a 3 a.m. friend. Who's the guy you hook up at 3 a.m. and go, dude, I need you here right now? Many of us, we don't have a friend like that. If we picked up the phone, we'd have no idea who to call at 3 a.m. I don't know. I don't even have a friend like that. Who would be that friend? I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Who's the guy when you're hanging on the cross that you go, take care of my mom? Who's that guy for you? Because many of us, we don't have anybody like that. And you know what? That's a shame. Because you're missing out on the deepest relationships. If you don't have a guy like that you can call, guys, you need to get connected to men here. If you don't have a 3 a.m. friend, you need to find one. Because life is too hard and the spiritual battle is too intense for you to run solo. Even Jesus had that guy. And John took his mom into his home for the rest of her life. Growing up with James made him tough on the outside, but growing to be like Jesus made him tender on the inside. John started off scrappy, but ended saintly. He learned to deliver the hammer of truth with a cup of love and a helping of gentleness and respect. Isn't that nice when you can hear the truth? But sometimes it's really hard to hear the truth when people are like blasting you in the face. It's nice when you can have the truth with like, what's the spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down? What was that from? Is that Mary Poppins? Okay. The lady that floated around with the umbrella or whatever. And she landed with the little children and helped them out. It's nice when you can hear the truth. But it's a lot nicer when you hear the truth with gentleness and respect. Right? Because for many of us, when we hear the truth, but it's very, very brutal, we just turn it off and go, I don't even want to hear that. But man, if you can have somebody that actually loves you speak into your life, then it impacts who you are. And that's what John ended up becoming. Lastly, the follow me ending. So the follow me moment at the beginning was John forsakes the fish to walk with Christ. And now how does John end his life? John's brother, James, we saw last week, actually died by being beheaded. He was executed. He's the first disciple to die. And now his brother actually is going to outlive everybody else. He's going to make it to almost the end of the first century. Jesus predicted John would live but suffer. And according to tradition, he was boiled in oil and exiled to the island of Patmos by Emperor Domitian, where he wrote the book of Revelation. So in the back of your Bible, the last book in your Bible called Revelation, he probably wrote it here. I want you to see this, that the cave where John actually spent a lot of his time is still there in Patmos. So of course they have to build like a church over it or whatever. But on the island of Patmos, you can go visit it today. Inside this cave, it's one of the most prominent caves on the whole island. They believe that this is where John stayed. So imagine John being 70, 80 years old. He's an old man. And he goes and lives. He has to sleep on granite. He's lived for Jesus his whole life, and this is how he ends his life. Is he sleeps in granite, on granite, cold, wet scenario being right on the coast. Not comfortable, not yay, rah, rah. John, at the end of his life, he's seen his brother die. He's seen every other disciple throughout the years give their life for Christ. And now here, right at the very end, John, in the cave, writes the last book in your Bible, Revelation, that's probably in the general area, if not the cave he wrote that book in. at the end of his life, tradition says he went back to Ephesus, which is on the mainland, and at the end of his life, he was so old, he had to be carted into the church on a stretcher. So imagine if you and I get really old here, if I'm here for like the rest of my life, and they're like, we're doing worship or whatever, and then like, okay, now it's time to hear the sermon, and all of a sudden the door's open, and here comes me all crusty or whatever, and they just kind of prop me up on the stage or whatever. I have to like brace myself. John, at the end of his life, was so frail that they had to carry him into church. And here's the thing I want to leave you with. The guy who started out, the scrappy younger brother who wanted to call down fire and torch people, who told Jesus, yeah, Jesus, whatever you're doing, I can do it too. That guy, at the end of his life, he became known as the apostle of love. Because he would tell people right to the day he died, love God and love other people with God's love. Because if you do that, that will be enough. John aged well. John started off rough, but he aged well. And for many of us, let's not just get old. Let's not just even get old gracefully. Let's get old for the glory of God. That when we get old, that we're not the same stupid young person bound up in an old body. That as we get old, we become more like Christ. That we don't stay the young idiot junior hire that we kind of sometimes view ourselves as, all the way to until we're just an old body, encapsulating that. Let us start off dumb, go for it. But let's not end there. Let's end great for the glory of God. Because Jesus is worth it. And John did that. John wrote for the glory of God, John lived for the glory of God, and ultimately John died for the glory of God.